Hello. As you'll recognize if you've been watching this channel along, I'm doing a new setup. I've found a way, I think, to get some decent lighting on the subject. And I just a few minutes ago finished recording the very last of 35 planned videos for the playlist on this channel called Whiskey Basics. That tells you how much information about whiskey I wanted to find in one place about 2.5 years ago when I started drinking whiskey and couldn't, which is the whole reason I started this channel, which is, as you saw, is Whiskey for Beginners. I'm Robert McKay. I am a Texas hick, if you can't tell from how I sound. And now that I've finished that list, I can focus more on other things, just random videos, reviews. If I get a wild hair and decide to blather on about the appearance of a label, I can do that. I have the necessaries out of the way. What I'm doing now, and we'll see how well this shows up on the on the screen. Talking slow, as they accuse Southerners of doing, has its advantages. Where everybody hunts for the right word, but because we're not talking as fast as we possibly can, I can't even do it. I have to force myself to do that. It is difficult for me, but because we talk slow, we have the time to hunt up the word we want without stopping going, like all these supposed experts do who can't even say one complete, coherent sentence on a subject they're supposedly expert on. But that time, it didn't work for me, and I wound up trying to say necessities and necessaries all at the same time. Didn't work. Anyway, we'll see if how this shows up on the screen. This is Old Overholt 4-year straight rye whiskey. It is a Jim Beam product. It's the oldest rye whiskey in the country that still is in existence. Established in 1810, but really it goes back before that. This is Abraham Overholt on the label, and he founded an Overholt dynasty, which, as far as I know, is no longer in liquor making. Jim Beam owns this brand and makes it. But this was originally a Pennsylvania rye whiskey. There have been three basic traditions, let's say, of rye whiskey. One is Pennsylvania, and if you know anything about history, if you went through public schools, you probably don't. They don't teach anything. They just indoctrinate you. But after the end of the Revolutionary War, and after the adoption of the Constitution and George Washington's inauguration as president, Congress decided they had to pay off the huge debt that the United States owed to various, mainly France, but to various countries for financing the revolution. Fighting a war is not cheap. You have to feed and clothe the army. You have to get weapons and ammunition. So Congress passed an excise tax on liquor. And the farmers in western Pennsylvania, who might not have any cash money between one year and the next, rose up in arms. They attacked the chief tax collector, and they called it the Whiskey Rebellion. It's the only time in the history of the United States that a sitting president, in his role as commander in chief, has led troops in the field. George Washington led out something like 10,000 men, I think it was, which at that time was a large force. Now it's a division or less. And the Whiskey Rebellion dispersed. They knew they couldn't fight the army. And a lot of the farmers in western Pennsylvania, disgusted with suddenly having to pay a tax on what they had been doing for 100 and 200 years without a tax, drifted south along the Appalachians into North Carolina, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, and that is where that moonshine and culture came from that is still embedded in that part of the country. So Abraham Overholt was making rye in Pennsylvania. The other two traditions of rye were Maryland, and Sagamore Spirit, is my understanding is working to revive that, although they've been using MGP juice, which comes out of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. If it wasn't for MGP, a lot of distilleries could not make it. People like to hate MGP. It has brought any number of distilleries to the point where they could begin using their own juice. And then there is, of course, a Kentucky tradition where the farmers and whatnot who moved into Appalachia were making rye whiskey, and they did it in a way that used the resources of that area. And the big distilleries, of course, they always do. They get into the act. If something is good and you can make it at a price people will pay, a company will do it. That's why all this conspiracy theory nonsense about the oil companies are preventing this and the car companies are preventing that. If it were a way to make money, they would not prevent it. They would do it. But anyway, Old Overholt, it's a Kentucky rye, but originated in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to review it. I have blathered on for 7 minutes, and I did not intend to. I'm going to just pour a little bit. The less I pour in the glass, the less I have to pour back into the bottle. And Coke is the only thing that really clears my palate. Water doesn't do it. Crackers don't do it. I don't know why. I suspect it may be related to the fact that my tongue is very sensitive to heat. I can't eat very spicy food, and I can't eat much of it. And I suspect that it's that which has something to do with the difficulty in clearing my palate. So Coke to do that. And I don't have very much in the glass, maybe you can see. So I'm swirling it pretty vigorously to agitate it, get some fumes coming off of it. And it's a nice color. I don't have a way to really look at the color, but it's pretty good. And I'm going to see what it smells like. I definitely get a rye indication. There's a combination of vegetal and mineral in there. This is, what proof is it? It's 86 proof, so there's a lot of water in it. And I don't have the mash bill handy. It's a Jim Beam product. I don't believe it's as low as a barely legal rye. The minimum rye content for rye whiskey has to be 51%. I don't think it's that low, but I don't think it's a very high rye. MGP does a marvelous 95% rye mash bill. Sagamore Spirit has used it. Bullet has used it. Very good. But I'm definitely getting that rye indication. It smells like coarse leaves and ground granite, perhaps. I go walking occasionally up in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains, and they're granite with a limestone layer up on top. And granite, when it decomposes and turns into sand, it's a very coarse sand because of the size of the grains in granite. And I've never tasted it, I've never smelled it, but what I'm getting here reminds me of that. There's a kind of a sweet and sour note. I'd almost say I'm getting sweet corn. And there might be corn in here. There probably is. Most rye whiskeys are going to have rye, corn, and barley. That 95.5 from MGP, 95% rye and 5% barley for the enzymes, as far as I know. And I'm probably wrong, but as far as I know, is the only common rye mash bill that doesn't have corn. There's kind of a salty note. I've had this before. It's a brown bottle, so you can't see very well, but it's about halfway down. So I already know it is not a very complex whiskey, so I'm not going to keep digging on the nose. I'll go ahead and take a sip. First, I got caramel and brown sugar, and then there was spice from the rye. And again, it's not a complex whiskey. I'm not looking for layers upon layers of flavor. But I think I got a little oak there just before I swallowed. There is some oak in there, just a tiny smidge of bitterness, not enough to really notice unless you're really looking into it. It's just enough to make it piquant. Then the finish is mostly oak. The oak is staying there for a while. Let me take another sip and focus on the finish. Okay, there's some spice at the beginning of the finish. And maybe some butter in there too. Just a quick flash, a thin layer of butter. And then there's the oak coming in, a kind of a bitter oak. And it's got a nice Kentucky hug when you swallow fairly quickly. Because the longer you hold it in your mouth, the more flavor you can extract from it, but also the more your saliva waters it down and thins it out. So to really get a Kentucky hug, don't just throw a shot back. That's not how to appreciate whiskey. But take a sip, hold it a little bit, swish it around, get some flavor, and then swallow fairly quickly, and you can feel it go down, and it's nice and warm. So this is not a very complex whiskey. Let me go back and just see if I can get something else on the nose now. Often, and various whiskey reviewers will tell you this, after you've taken a few sips, you can go back and get more on the nose because taste and smell are very closely connected. Yeah, I think I'm getting some butter on the nose now. Well, I'm not getting a whole lot more. As I have said, Old Overholt, Kentucky. It says made in Kentucky down here, straight rye whiskey. So it is a Kentucky straight rye whiskey. Old Overholt, 4 years. Is not a very complex whiskey. It's not going to surprise you. It's not going to overwhelm you. But this channel is whiskey for beginners. And if you're a beginner, or if you've been drinking Scotch or Irish or bourbon or what have you, and you're just starting to get into rye, this is a really good bottle to start with. It won't overwhelm you with spice. It won't overwhelm you with heat. It is only 4 years old, but apparently, because of the emphatic nature of the flavor, rye whiskey is ready to drink a little quicker than is whiskey that's mostly corn, bourbon or corn whiskey or what have you. I definitely recommend Old Overholt. There is a lot worse whiskey out there. I've had some of it. There's better, certainly. I think Sagamore Spirit and Bullet are both better. This is at least as good. Well, let me rephrase that. This is about as good as Knob Creek rye. Knob Creek may have a little bit of an edge on it. They're both Jim Beam bottles, by the way. But you could do a lot worse than Old Overholt. Cheers.